Good morning. I'm Susan Cosgrove, and I will be your host for this episode of our live stream show, MyDiabetesHQ Live. The elections are upon us, and we strongly encourage you to get out and vote. When you or someone close to you is living with diabetes or obesity, what happens in your community has a big impact on you. Civic engagement starts with voting, but there are many other ways you can make your voice heard through legislative advocacy, policymaking, collaboration, and community coalition building. If any of that sounds intimidating, fear not. Today, we're going to break it all down into the simple steps you can take to champion the causes that matter to you in your spheres of influence at the local, county, state, and federal level. Today's episode is coming up right now. Stick with us, you don't want to miss it. Before we begin, a gentle reminder that the content shared during the MyDiabetesHQ Live broadcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding your medical conditions. This weekly broadcast is developed and produced by Cities Changing Diabetes volunteers in Houston and in Philadelphia. Both cities are in the network of 28 cities working to improve diabetes prevention, care, and management globally. You can learn more about Cities Changing Diabetes by going to citieschangingdiabetes.org. The purpose of this live stream is to help people with diabetes and their support teams. And today we're revisiting the topic of advocacy, something that we touched on a couple weeks ago, with an added dimension of civic engagement. Leave a comment, share where you are, ask a question, and join the conversation. Before we introduce our guests today, I want to remind our viewers that one way you can make your voice heard is by voting in the current election. Election day is Tuesday, November 3rd, and the election is already underway across the country. Depending on where you live, you may be able to vote early in person or in person on election day, or by dropping your mail-in ballot in a drop box. If you haven't voted already, make your plan today. Share your plan with a friend or family member and ask them how they plan to cast their ballot. You can find all the information that you need at vote.org. So on an episode earlier this month, we discussed how people living with diabetes can advocate for themselves at work and at school. This week, I'm really excited to introduce our guest this morning who will tell us more about the many ways that you can make your voice heard in your community through policy and advocacy work. So first we have Tim Schauer, who's a contract lobbyist for Harris County Public Health Department's Healthy Living Matters Coalition. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning,
Welcome
Susan.
to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. And then joining us, we also have award-winning school advocate Michelle Smith of she's the Texas State Coordinator for Action for Healthy Kids. Good morning, Michelle. How are you?
Good morning. I feel a little underdressed beside Tim.
We'll send you a hat.
All right. We'll go to
So I want to start this morning. I feel like it's really powerful to start with sort of the personal connection and the personal stories. So Tim, why don't you start by telling us your story? What put you on the path to legislative advocacy, and what excites you about the work that you do?
Yeah, that's a great question, Susan. I never woke up in the morning one day and said, gosh, I want to be a lobbyist. I got my degree in biology and was moved to Texas and was in Austin working on my graduate program and got a job in the Capitol, and kind of it's like a fever and you kind of catch the fever. And I worked on a health policy task force back in the early 90s. And one of the first pieces of legislation I actually worked on was a piece of legislation about the Texas Diabetes Council, which is a very a state-specific approach to diabetes. And for about 10 years, I worked inside the Texas Senate and grew in responsibilities and kept thinking I was going to go back and finish graduate school and get a real job. And the next thing you know, the healthcare system in Houston, Texas asked me to come and start a government relations program. So I moved my family to Houston, went to work for Memorial Hermann, built a government relations and advocacy program inside that organization. And after about 10 years there, decided that I could take it out and do contract work. So I had finished an MBA program while I was at Memorial Hermann, and for the last 10 years, I've been an advocate. And fortunately, I've been able to build a business where I I work on issues that I'm really passionate about. So I work primarily in the Medicaid space, and I work on a lot of public health issues, access to care, access to disease management, all those kind of issues that the good public health strategies have been talking about in some cases for 30 and 40 years that just haven't come to fruition in Texas. But that's kind of my story. I'm looking forward to this session. It's going to be a little different with COVID, of course, but that's how I got into this.
That's great. And we're so lucky to have your many decades of experience to share this morning on the broadcast. Michelle, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story, how you got started and what you're passionate about in the work that you do?
Sure. So I actually spent 20 years in advertising and marketing, and feel a little bit responsible and apologize for the part I played in the Pepsi generation. Back then, Pepsi was trying to overtake Coke and not successful. And of course they said, look, let's go after the kids. And at the time I had no idea what a terrible thing that was. So after 20 years in marketing and advertising, I've spent the last 20 plus years working to undo some of that damage. I was involved with a project through the American Cancer Society around coordinated school health. And that's when I came to realize that the schools had been overrun with bad health habits. There were vending machines on every floor. PE was being done away with. Recess wasn't being used. A lot of things had just deteriorated from when I was in school. School meals had become packaged, processed food as opposed to home cooking. In fact, a lot of schools didn't even have kitchens. So by working on that project, I was introduced to the issues around coordinated school health and became very active in that. That's when we were in Texas trying to make headway, but not getting a lot of traction. We did have school health advisory councils established, but the legislature was not really listening to us. And then Dr. David Satcher came in and said, we have an obesity epidemic. And once that hit, that gave us some traction, and we were able to start making policy changes and working with the legislature. We even with the R's, Susan Combs, as the ag commissioner, helped pass a school nutrition policy, which we worked on, that was the leader for USDA and what they ultimately put in place. So Texas was really strong around school health and building these school health advisory councils for many years. We had 3 commissioners in health that really helped us pass policy for several years there. So I also lost my brother and my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law to diabetes. And that really showed me why we have to teach our kids and why it's important for our children to understand how health impacts their lives, because these were cases where they were all could have been preventable. My brother was alcoholic. My mother-in-law was obese. They didn't take care of themselves. They didn't eat right. And so it just shows me how important it is that we continue to work to change things and change policies.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Michelle. And we're definitely going to dig more into a lot of the school advocacy work because I think that's really critical. I love how each of you kind of have your own separate paths to advocacy and policy. It really shows how everybody has a path that is their own and unique. And I think, having that personal connection and the personal tie to your work is also really important. So before we dig into kind of all of the details, Tim, could you start by demystifying the policy and advocacy process for us and for our viewers? I feel like it can feel like a total mystery. It can feel overwhelming. So break it down for us.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Susan. And really, when I talk to groups, there's a lot of concern, like, oh, I have to go to the Capitol. I don't even know how to do that. I've never done that. I thought you just went and took tours at the Capitol. I didn't know you actually went in. So let me talk real briefly about how I simplify it into kind of a few easy steps to kind of so people can wrap their brains around it, because oftentimes people don't even know what to say, how do you get what you're doing? So I simplify it into what I call the policy cycle. And it's a 4-step thing. And we're going to start right at the top and in that light blue area, where as a group, as a person, as a family, you have to say, what are the problems? What are the issues? What's causing me so much frustration in trying to get what I need, whether it be treatment for your diabetes, whether it be coverage, you're unable to access health coverage, either through Medicaid or through your private, your employer, and there's frustration there, right? And if you start digging into your issue and you start talking to people, you may find out, and you usually find out, that other people have the same problems that you do. And so if you jump online, look around, find groups where you have some affinity, is what I call it, jump into those groups, figure out what they're working on. And if they're working on some of the same issues you are, and they've got some of the same problems, then see if you can work with them and find out if there's already, and you'll hear me use this term quite a bit today, if there's a parade already going and they're going in the same direction you want to go, jump on that parade, jump into that parade. So the idea that first piece is about identifying the problem that's most important to you, because if you find a group that is passionate about the same problem that you are, then you've kind of found some common ground. And Michelle mentioned that the Action for Healthy Kids, there's a group right there. And then she's found other groups, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the Partnership for Healthy Kids here in Texas. That's even a bigger group, a statewide parade. My activity in this started in 2012 when we jumped into the Healthy Living Matters organization, which was a childhood obesity effort here in Houston that was started. And the very first thing they said is, okay, what policy should we work on? And I said, great, what's broken? What do we need to fix? Before you worry about the policies, you got to figure out what's broken. So that's the most important part to me, is getting people rallied together and agreeing on what's broken. Because if you can't agree on what's broken, then the next step is almost impossible to get to. You're never going to get anything there. So the second step is once you got a group of people, whether it be 5 or 10 people or 500 people, then you start brainstorming. Okay, so how do we fix this? And don't worry about levels of government. Don't worry about, any sort of right language or wrong language. Just get ideas out there. Do we need to make sure that we have more parks in our community so kids can safely play? Do we need to make sure that the food in the schools, like Michelle was working on, is healthy? That's an issue in some communities, not in others, right? So if you figure out what's the most important issue in your community, that starts to drive the recommendations. And so you brainstorm these ideas together, you put them all on a piece of paper. And I can tell you the Healthy Living Matters group spent the better part of 6 months listening to the community, talking, what are the issues? And at one point we had over 68 issues that we specifically identified as ones that we wanted to address. Well, if you took 68 problems to somebody and said, I want you to fix all 68, how well do you think that goes? People turn around and run away like, oh my gosh, this thing's a mess. I don't even know where to start, right? So once you've brainstormed the issues, you've brainstormed the ideas, then you bring everybody together and you say, okay, what are the most important ones that we work on? What are going to have the biggest effect? Which ones can we get implemented? Which ones can we really collaborate and rally around and communicate to the decision makers what those are? And so that prioritization process is the second piece. We haven't even gotten anywhere close to the Capitol yet. If you've noticed, we're 50% in and we're not talking to anybody yet. We're just trying to figure out what is it that's broken and what do we recommend to fix it. So it's a fun process. It's super important to talk to people who are involved. This is where I'll use the term stakeholders. If doctors are involved, make sure you have some doctors at the table. If you've got school administrators involved, make sure you have some school people at the table. If you want to build parks, make sure some parks people are at the table, because you need to understand as a group, as an individual, what is it in the community that is so important that you think this will help reduce the incidence of diabetes, improve treatment of diabetes, all those issues, be preventive of diabetes, particularly type 2. Obviously, type 1 is a different issue. Let's focus on type 2 right now. So that recommendation prioritization process, what I try to encourage groups to do is try to get it down to 3 or 4 at most, because when you talk to someone and you have 5 minutes to make your case, you're not going to be able to make your case for 68 recommendations, right? But you might be able to convince them to engage on 3. So we got our organization at Healthy Living Matters to organize them down. At one point, oh gosh, this was a fight. We got them down to like 18. And I'm like, guys, we can't do 18. We got to organize them down to fewer. How do we get it? And we had a young woman who had just finished reading the book, Eat, Pray, Love. And she said, you know what? These things fall into 3 categories: eat, play, learn. And we all kind of went, oh my gosh, that's a brilliant idea. Let's organize these recommendations into that. So in the eat category, we were able to put 5 ideas under what healthy foods were important that kids could get to. In the play category, we had 5 recommendations specifically about safe areas to play, more time at school to play, appropriate access. And ironically enough, in Houston, we found out that it's not always safe to play or to go for a walk because we had a wild dog problem on the east side of town. So we needed to improve the dog catchers. I never thought that was connected to diabetes, but believe it or not, if you can't go out and have a safe walk around the block, you're not going to go out and walk around the block. So we categorized that. And then to me, the most important category was the learn category, where we said, what's going on between the ears, right? What are we doing as it relates to health literacy? And we put together some of the ideas into that. So again, we haven't talked to anybody yet. We've organized, we've put our papers together, we've done the research. Now we're actually ready to do some advocacy. And the best training I tell people to do with advocacy is don't go down to the Capitol the first day. Talk to your neighbor. Talk to your friends, have a dinner party and say, hey, in the middle of the, can I tell you guys a project I'm working on? We're working on this cool diabetes project, and we've got it down to 3 things. Here are the 3 things we want to work on. And practice it a few times with your friends, right? And if they engage with you and you're having a good conversation, you're halfway there to being a lobbyist. You're ready to be an advocate, all right? So if you've practiced it a few times, you've got your messaging down, you understand how to convince somebody that may not know anything about your issue. Practice it on your grandma. Practice it on somebody that is in a different community than you are. And if you can convince them, not even convince them, if you can just engage them in that conversation, you're ready. So then the trick is, and if we can go back to the slide, now we're ready to jump into the 3rd quadrant. And that 3rd quadrant on that slide is all about advocacy and implementation. And that's when you have to say, and this is when it helps to have somebody like me involved, is what level of government can actually make these changes. So for example, if you want to fix sidewalks in your community and you go meet with your congressman, the congressman is going to kind of tilt their head like, sidewalks? I don't do sidewalks. I'm a congressman, right? It's your city council member. So you need to figure out which level of government is the most important to go to implement each one of your recommendations. It sounds complicated, but it's really not. You just look at the most local issues, start with your local folks that you talk to, a city council member, a county commissioner, in some states call them aldermans. There's all sorts of different names that people use for their local executives. And if you can get the ideas started and moving at the local level, great. If there's something that you have to go to your capital, guess what? You're going to go in and talk to your member of the legislature, or in some places they call it the assembly, the state assemblies. But this is where advocacy really happens. And that conversation that you practiced with your grandma, that's the exact same conversation that you're going to have with the elected official, except for when you're done with it, you're going to ask them to vote for something, or you're going to ask them to add something into the budget for it. There's going to be an ask at the end of that. So that's kind of where people get stuck, is they're afraid to go do that. But if you think of it as, hey, I'm just talking to my grandma, or I'm talking to a friend, it's not intimidating at all. And in reality, in a democracy like we have, it's supposed to work like that. We're supposed to be able to talk to our legislators, talk to our members of Congress if need be, but most importantly, talk to your city council member. Some of these ideas are school board issues. How many of you, and if we were in person, I'd ask you to raise your hand, how many of you have ever thought of just picking up the phone and calling a school board member? They're your neighbors oftentimes, and they're the ones who can actually listen, hear about what's going on in healthcare and in health as it relates to diabetes, and then engage and make some local decisions to improve the situation. So one last step, and this is to me one of the most important steps in advocacy, and what we're working on with Healthy Living Matters and the Partnership for a Healthy Texas, is once you get some momentum going, how do you evaluate whether it's working or not? How do you make sure it's sustainable? And to me, the most important question is, have we fixed what we said at the first quadrant of the thing, which is, did we fix the problem? And if the answer is no, well, did we get 10% towards fixing it? And if the answer is yes, great, we want to sustain that. How do we get the other 90% fixed? How do we work on that? and you start the process again. So I really think that when you break it down into its simplest points, it's all about, can you just talk about an issue, and can you work with other people? And that's how we built the effort that we've been doing here in Houston. We're trying to make some progress in Texas with some of the larger groups. But that evaluation piece is to me super important, and the sustainability. One of the things that I tell people, and I hope I don't burst your bubble, but there's no such thing as happily ever after. I know the school books, the storybooks end like that, but when it comes to working on an issue, you got to get to what you want done, but you got to stay at it. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to work on it for 2 years, and then I'm going to go back to playing video games or whatever. Bottom line is, we as individuals and families and communities have to stay attuned to these issues and stay on top of them, because they're not going to go away. Obesity is not going to go away in 10 years or 20 years. This is going to take a sustained effort for decades to turn the clock back to where we were even in the 70s. It's going to take at least 5 decades to undo what these 5 decades have done. So we got to stay at it and get after it. So that's the cycle. You stay in it, you stay in the game, you engage, and you get passionate about it. You celebrate the victories when you get them. And if you get defeated along the way, you learn from them and you figure out, why didn't we win that? Oh, well, sometimes the politicians didn't agree with us, or it wasn't the right time, whatever the issue is. But you learn from it and you move forward and you keep chugging. So that's kind of a summary. I try to demystify that, and allow people to work on these issues and really engage in the simplest step. And by the way, you don't have to do this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you engage a couple of hours a week, if you engage, whatever level you can engage in will help the parade. Get that parade going, get involved in the parade. That to me is effective advocacy.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Tim, for breaking that down into steps for us. And I think I'm going to tap into, you mentioned health literacy. Obviously, that is one of my specialties and something that I'm passionate about. So I want to do a little teach back moment with you and kind of break it down into what I heard as the key steps and see if we can summarize, and you can correct me if I go astray. But basically, first step, find your people, find your groups, find your issues, figure out what you're passionate about. Start talking to people, see what's happening already in the areas that you care about. Second step, build more energy, get excited, start that brainstorm, put it all out on the table. It doesn't matter if you end up with 68 or 200 issues. Start from there, narrow it down, try to get it down to 3 to 5 things that you really care about and that you want to work towards. And from that, I really love that eat, play, learn example that you gave. I think just a great example of, the expertise that the community brings to kind of the table, right? Is that you don't have to be a professional to think about these things creatively. You don't have to be a professional and do this full time to be able to bring a really valuable viewpoint and framework that makes sense of things, when you're talking about this process. From there, you mentioned kind of practicing your pitch. Like you said, talk to your grandmother, talk to your friends, get comfortable talking about this, because that's what you need to do when you engage the higher ups, is you need to be able to have that conversation. And then ID who it is that you need to go talk to. Make sure you're talking to someone at the right level and engaging the right folks. And then finally, sit back and assess if it's working. How is it working? Have you gotten 10% there? Have you gotten 5% there? Count that as a victory, evaluate, see what you could do differently, see where you have room to grow. So how did I do? Did I do okay?
That was perfect. That was a great summation. I probably should have shortened my talk to that. No, that was perfect, Susan. Thank you.
And Michelle, I'd love for you to jump in here and talk about your experience with any of these steps and how you've really seen this play out in the work that you do, particularly around school health advisory councils.
Sure. So, one of the things that we talk about is the implementation. You can have all the policies in the world, but they don't get implemented, you have a problem. So that's one of the things where I've focused over the years is, and work through school health advisory councils, because that's bringing it back down to the district level, at the schools, on the grounds, to try to get things accomplished. When we work with the legislature, we tried to put things in place through the school health advisory councils to make sure that policies get implemented. So if we pass a policy that says we need our kids to be more active in PE at least 50% of the time, how are we going to make sure that happens when we get down to school level? The School Health Advisory Council is to monitor that in a way, and we put in place a policy at the state level that says all campuses will have a campus improvement plan that shows how kids are going to be active 50% or more of their time during PE. So the school health advisory councils came into being in the late 90s. Texas wanted some input from communities and parents around sex ed, basically. And so they were formed on that basis, but we took the councils and said, let's make them more than something that's monitoring sex ed. Let's put them in charge of child health. So in the early 2000s, they changed the name to the School Health Advisory Council, and we started working around the coordinated school health model. And every session, we would come in and ask for a piece of legislation that either expanded the scope of what SHACs would do, or if help with the implementation of what the policies that had already been passed. So now our school advisory councils are required to have at least 50% parents, and then the other half would be school staff, community members, any type of resources, usually medical people, public health, counselors, content experts that can help around the areas that we're discussing as school health advisory councils. They have to look at recess policies and make sure that there is a policy in place. Doesn't mean you have to have recess or how many minutes of recess, but they're required to review and make recommendations based on best policy. So the SHACs have grown over time to be a more important element. I would say I wish that all the districts had the type of SHACs they should have. One of the things that helps, and if you're obviously not all states have this as a requirement, that every district have a SHAC, but all districts or all school entities should have wellness policies if you are serving school meals. And because those wellness policies are to be developed by a group of people, including parents, students, child nutrition, a SHAC serves that purpose in Texas. So the SHACs usually are the ones that work on wellness policies. So if you're in a state where it's not a requirement to have a SHAC, you should still have a group of people that work on wellness policies. And that's some place that you can go to your district. They should have wellness policies on their websites or available to you through the district offices, and you can go and find out what type of wellness policies you have. And that's a great place to start looking at how you might want to improve things in your district. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's great, Michelle. I was just going to ask a little bit about, you talked about the evolution, which I think is really important, of the SHACs, and that moment when, these were founded to really get into the specific issue of sex ed and then kind of moved into more general wellness. Was that something that happened very naturally, or was that something that really took a big push to kind of make that shift and that pivot happen?
They were formed in 1995 around that specific topic, and by 2001, like 2 sessions later, we had changed their focus. Partly because kids don't have sex in Texas, so we didn't need those councils to do that. It's such a controversial topic that we felt by moving the SHACs into looking at all of school health and the impact that every area has on a child's ability to be successful in school, that we would be able to be more effective. And we're still fighting some of the battles of some of our older legislators who still look at the School Health Advisory Council or SHAC and say, oh, that's just the sex council. And it's like, no, this is something that helps our children be healthy. We are looking at school meals. We are looking at, mental health, social emotional health, staff wellness, all the different components that impact a child. And right now, it's even more important. That's one of the things we've done over this past summer was we've had a lot of webinars to try to support SHACs and try to get them to focus on different things. Parents are coming to SHAC meetings now a lot more heavily. One of our districts said they had over 100 parents show up at one of their SHAC meetings they just had because they're concerned about their children's health. And this is a perfect time for them to get in there and advocate for, all the different things. I mean, right now, I'm concerned about physical education because the kids are virtual or they're on campus. Our PE teachers may be having to try to do both. And the school's pushing back and going, well, we need that time for academics. So it's really important to have those parents in there advocating to make sure these kids are still have an opportunity to be active. I think most parents who have kids at home have realized how important recess and physical activity is. School meals, we've got child nutrition directors standing out in El Paso in the snow, making sure that the families get school meals who are off campus. There's so many things that, parents can get involved with and advocate to help our schools now, so that when we come back to a semblance of the normalcy we used to have, their things are in place and we're not having to start over.
Yeah, that makes sense that now more than ever, these committees would be really critical to kind of ensuring that student health remains a priority. So I want to just come back to a comment that we got earlier in the broadcast from Serena about how listening to the community is imperative, especially in changing the policies concerning them. And I think this comes back to kind of an approach to working with the community and to the policy, nothing about us without us. And I would love to hear from both of you about how you make sure that that community voice is represented and engaged, and that the community is involved every step of this process for policy and advocacy work to ensure that what you're proposing, there's community buy-in, and that community members feel like it's for them and it's going to work for them as well.
Michelle, you want to start that?
Oh, I was going to let you go first.
Sure, you bet. In the legislative process, what we talk about is sunshine laws, and making sure that there are no deals cut in the back rooms where there isn't inclusion, where people aren't able to see that. And believe it or not, Texas has actually been recognized as one of the most open and inclusive legislatures for almost 30 years. We were one of the first legislatures to put all the meetings online. We were one of the first to have websites that you could search any legislative bill or any idea and see everything about it. So whereas in the early 90s, before we really kind of had the internet, you had to be in the Capitol to participate. You had to show up to participate. Now I could be in Nevada. I can pick anywhere, right? I could be in Mexico, and as long as I've got access to the internet, I could track, I could follow, and this, by the way, is pre-COVID. I could follow everything that was going on, and I could send in notes to people, their emails and connection points that were right there. So being involved isn't so much now a hidden thing, like government is over there, like the school boards are over there and kind of hidden. Now it's a matter of what's inside your heart, and do you have time to engage, and do you want to engage? Because the access points are there. And really it's a question of, are you willing to participate? Are you going to take some time out and go and do it? So this sounds like I'm kind of throwing it on the individual, but quite frankly, in a democracy, it's on the individuals to participate. And some of those old barriers that were there are no longer there. So I highly recommend people find out what is your school district website. If you're passionate about what's going on with your Department of Health at the county level. Don't even worry about going to the state yet. Pay attention to what's going on locally. And once you start getting into those areas, once you start finding out where it is, then you can figure out best places to get your voice heard. And again, back to that parade that I'm talking about, interact with your parade, figure out what they're working on and who they're talking to. And oftentimes the organizations, like what we're doing right now with Healthy Living Matters, we do everything we can to keep the people in the coalition informed and engaged. And we bring legislators to talk to us, right? We can bring school district board members to talk to us. And so there's the opportunity to participate. Again, 30 years ago, there were all sorts of barriers to participating. Now, the only barrier to participating is whether you want to participate or not. It's pretty easy to do so. I can do it from my dining room table, which is where I'm at right now. Again, thanks to COVID. Normally I would be in an office and be visiting people one-on-one. But even during this weird time of a pandemic, people still answer their phones. They answer emails. Engagement is so much easier now. And yet people think it's still difficult. It's not. Jump in, go.
You have anything to add, Michelle?
I was going to say, we have been working in El Paso. And one of the issues they had down there, they had a community-wide project called Healthy Eating, Active Living, which was engaging the community to get them more active and to eat better, but they were not getting anywhere with the school district. So they asked Action for Healthy Kids to come in, and we formed a community coalition around school health and brought in the community so that they could support the school districts as the school districts work to improve policies. We have been working with 4 districts. They have all made changes to their policies. They have all improved the wellness based on some evaluation of their campuses, and that's how we got the community buy-in, was to have this community coalition. And we met with them and we talked to them about what they foresaw as the problems. We ended up identifying at the schools problems being safe routes, because they actually had several fatalities and had some serious issues around kids walking and biking to school. Recess. There was only 1 district that had a recess policy of any sort. School meals were not high levels of participation, and then joint use agreements where community organizations could have access to school facilities and things. And in 3 years' time, we've made such great progress on all those. All the schools are a lot more engaged. The parents are more engaged. The PTA came to us and said, we want to be part of this. The city came to us and said, we want to join. School districts that weren't part of our original 4 have attended our coalition meetings and gotten engaged as well. So there's always a way to get the community engaged if you tap into the right people, and get with your university people if you're in a town that has a university, or get with your public health people or your transportation people. Again, as Tim said, wherever the problem is, if there's a problem and you can identify it in the community, then you engage those people, and that will bring the rest of them. And don't be afraid. One of the things I thought of earlier is don't be afraid to talk to your school board members. School board members, as Tim mentioned, are your neighbors, are your community, and they're the way to get to the district and make sure that things actually get implemented. So don't be afraid to call on a school board member or send them a letter. You'd be surprised how quickly they'll respond.
I think that's great advice. Yeah. And kind of love how you highlighted to, getting community involved early on in the process as well, is that, if you can have the community buy-in when you're doing that initial identification of the issues, you're going to kind of maintain that throughout that entire policy advocacy cycle that we looked at. So we talked a lot about kind of community engagement, coalitions. I want to spend some time talking about a specific coalition. So Michelle, could you tell us a little bit more about the Partnership for Healthy Texas and get us started there?
Sure. We'd had a paper came out about the fact that we had a serious obesity crisis in Texas. And we had been working independently. The different disease organizations, cancer, heart, diabetes, had all focused on different things. And every legislator was doing something around, school meals or activity, or, we had so many bills coming in that nobody could keep track. And some of them were really bad. So we got together as a group and said, we really need to be working together on issue of obesity so that we're getting traction on the things that really matter. So all the groups got together and we formed the Partnership for Healthy Texas. And then we sat down with our different organizations, including the health department and all the different nonprofits, and said, what are the critical issues? So we brought the program people together to discuss where the problems were. And then we brought the government affairs people and the lobbyists in to say, how do we fix this? How do we legislate things that will make a difference around these issues? So the partnership was born, and the first year we identified 5 priorities for areas that we wanted to focus on, and we came up with bills for each of those priorities, and we passed bills on all but 1, I think. So we made a huge impact. Over the years, we've been very successful. Some years we've passed legislation, some years we've had to do defense and just try to hold on to what we had. But we've been able to be effective in the best of times and the worst of times because we're doing it together. So finding like-minded organizations that can work together made it so much easier. The program people needed help from the advocates, the people that are on the ground at the Capitol, but the people on the ground at the Capitol didn't have a lot of time to sit and listen. So like I said, by being able to work simultaneously with people and get the information we needed to the people that can make the policy happen was really extremely helpful. And now we're starting a brand new session in January, because Texas only meets every 2 years, which means we have like 6 months to pass policies. So it's really a challenge to get things accomplished. So Tim can probably share a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. That's a great little bit of history on it. But if I would talk a little bit about the importance of the partnership, is it not only is the disease groups, it's got the doctors involved, it's got universities involved, and it's got local coalitions involved. And I'll just tell you the story. In 2011 and 2013, Healthy Living Matters, which is a Houston-based coalition, tried to get some legislation passed. And it turns out that we could educate our Houston delegation, but we only make up about a third of the statewide legislation. And that isn't going to carry the day. Texas is a huge state. Pennsylvania is a big state. If you've got a populous big state, it gets much more complicated. So bringing those voices together like the partnership did. And so in 2015, the Healthy Living Matters joined the partnership, and we had a really iterative process about talking about our priorities and how they fit into the partnership's priorities. And we kind of melded some of those together. And it really was a beautiful coalition. One of the members of the coalition is a group called Mission Readiness. And that's made up of about 400 generals from the military that have identified obesity as one of the biggest problems in America, if indeed they had to re-implement the draft, or if we got into a situation where we needed young people ready to go into the military. And the number of people that can actually pass the initial push-up test is down below, I believe nationwide, it's below 38%. Literally over 65% of kids cannot do the basic entrance, not survive boot camp. They can't even get into boot camp. So these generals joined and said, we want to be part of this as well. And just to give you some numbers, so the legislature meets every other year for 140 days. We have 150 members in the House, 31 members in the Senate. So there's 181 elected officials that we have to get somehow a majority of those to agree that something is important. So if a Houston coalition is doing something, that's good. But if that coalition can join a statewide coalition that brings people from Dallas and San Antonio and El Paso and the Valley and San Angelo, boom, now we've got statewide coverage. So it was super important. We had the pediatricians involved. It was and is a phenomenal organization to be involved in. So Michelle has been a parade builder for a long time. She's up there in the front of that parade. We've got Clayton Travis. Some of the people that we have are truly spark plugs in the organization. And one of the phrases we used at the beginning, Susan, you mentioned Advocacy Champions. Not everybody has to be a champion. Sometimes you have to be a dutiful soldier to follow the champions, and so those parades need to be big, and not everybody can be out front. Sometimes you got to have a group of people out front, a bunch of people in the middle, and a bunch of people at the end, and everybody's going in the same direction. And so Michelle is clearly one of those people that we've worked with over the years, and has dedicated so much of her time and energy here in Texas to staying after it. And I got to tell you, it's so appreciated. And we just have to expand the rest of the parade, and we're continuing to grow the parade. One of the other interesting things that we've had to do, and this is kind of a bizarre thing, is we've had to re-educate people that obesity is a problem. When the legislature turns over and you get new elected officials or you get new board members, they may come in with their own ideas that, XYZ is the big issue of the day. You go back to them and say, hey, we've been fighting an epidemic for 15 years. It's not gone. We haven't even flattened the curve. We need to flatten the curve and take it down. And it still takes a lot of effort. We need you engaged. And one of the worst stories that ever came out for us was prior to, I believe it was 2017, some story from somewhere in the Northwest said, oh, childhood obesity is on the decline. We're going to be fine. And so we went into some of the offices and they went, well, why do we have to work on this? It's all done. No, it's not done. We haven't cured diabetes. We haven't stopped heart disease. We have tons of preventative things that we can still be doing because it hasn't gone away. And so we had to start back at the beginning with some of our legislators. That can be depressing to some people. And they're like, no, come on. We did that 5 years ago. We did that 10 years ago. Doesn't matter. You got to re-engage. You've got to get back in there, convince this new group of people. And so one of my jobs, as a matter of fact, it'll start after Tuesday, bringing up that issue of voting. If you haven't voted, please vote on Tuesday. Big thing on Tuesdays, we're going to have some new members. My first 2 weeks after that legislative that election is to find out who the new members are, get on the phone, talk to them, remind them that childhood obesity is still a problem in Texas, find out where they are on the issue, and see if we can convert them into being in the parade, maybe even being a champion. We had a wonderful woman who was in the legislature and then became our ad commissioner. Her name was Susan Combs. She was a tremendous champion, and then she retired, and we lost a lot of momentum. So you've got to. That's why I talk about there is no happily ever after. You got to stay engaged. You got to keep developing new champions. If you're not the champion, no problem. Be in the parade. Let's get some new champions. Let's keep marching.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm hearing and that I love about this coalition-based approach to policy and advocacy work is that everyone has a role and no one has to do everything. And I feel like that's a really important message for our viewers, is that there's always a way to get involved and you don't have to be the person leading the parade, as you said, Tim. And it sounds like this is a really effective way, again, coming back to the idea of getting buy-in. You're being inclusive. You have a big table. Everyone has a voice there, and you're bringing all of these stakeholders together to come to some consensus and agreement. I think sometimes, maybe not all the time, about what the most important things that need to be tackled are, which I think is just a fantastic way to go about doing this work. So I want to ask, what would you say to our viewers who are really interested in this? They're really excited hearing about kind of the role that they can play, but maybe they're still a little bit hesitant to get involved because they're not sure they have the skills or the knowledge or the time. What are the small steps people can take to begin their advocacy journeys? And what tips do you have for talking to policymakers?
Sure, you bet. I'll take that one, and then I'll throw it over to Michelle. First of all, don't be intimidated at all. These people put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you do. Or if you're in Texas, your shorts. But bottom line is first of all, get it out of your mind that somehow they are different than you, that they are somehow special because they got elected or because they're in some level of influence. Put that out. We've got a slide to kind of talk about some steps here that really kind of make it so easy to get started. Joy, can you throw that up there? Here it is. So the most important things to me is don't try to be somebody you're not. Be yourself. Be who you are. Don't worry about if you know all the data about diabetes or all the data about why diabetes is there or everything about one thing or another. Your story is enough. Who you are is enough. And if you care about this issue, it's going to shine through. Now, a lot of people are like, well, I can't go in and talk to them because I don't know everything about it. You know what? One of the most powerful things to say, if you're in a conversation with someone, if they ask you a question that you don't know, don't make it up. Don't pull it out of the back of your brain thinking, well, this might be it. Say, I don't know, but you know what? I'm going to find out that answer and I'm going to come back to you because it's important to you. Start talking about them, engage them in what the problem is. And like I talk about, be passionate, talk about it from your perspective, right? Don't be intimidated, have a conversation. That's why I talk about try it out with your grandma, try it out with a friend. And don't think about it as I've got to put together a PowerPoint presentation and be ready to click through my slides. Forget that. Have a conversation, convince them. I happen to play hockey, and some of the stuff that I do, I play in an old guy league. And after the games are over, we stand in the parking lot and drink a few beers. And oftentimes I'll practice some of what I'm going to talk about with legislators with these idiots that I play hockey with. Because I figure if I can convince them that we've got a problem and that there's a solution and that they should be part of it, then I probably have a winning argument because these guys don't care a lick about any of that. So if you can treat it as a conversation, engage with people, that's one of the best ways to learn how to engage with policymakers. Michelle is brilliant at it. I've been in the Capitol with her and she's calm. She's got all the background in the world to get all policy wonky with some of these people, and she can go into that gear if she has to, but she also can talk to people, look them in the eye and say, I care about these issues. Here's a couple of easy steps we can work on, and then have a conversation, listen to what they say. That's the other thing that I find really is lacking sometimes is people practice so much what you're going to say, and you're so convinced that you have a speech that is good that you forget to listen to the other side. And if the legislator says, my brother-in-law has diabetes and I've never talked to him. Ask him about his brother-in-law. Connect with him. Does your brother-in-law have to stick his finger after dinner? Does he have to, and all of a sudden now you're bonding with this person because he's a person. You're not lecturing him or giving him your pitch. You're having a conversation with him. So I think, to me, worrying about doing things exactly right when you go in can make you anxiety driven and all this other stuff. If you just forget all that stuff, you care about your issue, you know what you want to talk about, but go in and bond with the person, go in and meet. And here's one last thing before I throw it over to Michelle, is sometimes when you go in to talk to a legislator or a city council member, you may not talk to them. You may talk to their chief of staff. And some people are so insulted by that. What? I voted for so-and-so and they wouldn't meet with me. They've got a super busy day. And quite frankly, if you do talk to them, half their brain may be engaged somewhere else, but their chief of staff or their health advisor or they're somebody that's a real person that works on their team. And I can tell you, I did this for 10 years. You listen to people, you engage with people, and you learn from these people. And then you put together a brief for your boss. And the next day at 7 a.m. when you're briefing your boss on the issues, that's when that legislative staff person is so key. And you don't even know it because you're back at home, gone about your regular day. Whoever you get the chance to meet with, whether it's a staff person, whether it's an introductory person. And one of the funniest stories I have is we actually took a children's hospital executive with me to the Capitol in Washington, D.C., and we were visiting some congressional offices. And when we got back on the plane to fly home, he kind of shook his head and he said, Tim, I think our country's run by a bunch of 24-year-olds. Is that really the truth? And I kind of said, well, yeah, those are the staffers that we met with. They're the ones that are writing the briefing paper. And he goes, we need to get to know more of them. And that's the absolute right answer. And whether you're in the Pennsylvania Capitol, if you're listening from West Virginia or whatever state you're in, all these states have legislative staff. Talk to them, get them to be your advocate. Listen, some of them may have family members that are grappling with diabetes. Some of them may be grappling with obesity. Some of them may be grappling with some of the same issues you're grappling with. And if you get them on board, boom, now you've made a connection.
That's great. Yeah, Michelle, tell us a little bit about your approach, any tips you have for talking to policymakers and others. Oh, it looks like you're muted. There we go. You're good.
I would say you need to know your audience. I mean, if you're talking to a legislator, as Tim said, making it personal and relatable for that legislator. A lot of times legislators are really more concerned about the bottom line. If you're talking to a school board member, they're worried about test scores. They're worried about academics. You have to approach whatever it is you want and show how it can relate to what it is that's important to them. So if they have a child with autism, you're going to have a lot better chance of getting their focus on something if you can relate that into what you're trying to work on. If you're talking to a school board member and they just got the reports that the test scores are really low, if you can go in and show them how physical activity jumpstarts the brain and it makes kids do better on tests, they're going to be a lot more willing to listen to you. So I would say definitely make sure that you know the audience, you know who you're talking to, and whatever you're trying to make happen, that you can relate it to something that they can relate to, and then making it personal. So I think Tim did a really good job covering everything I would have said.
That's great. So we just have a few more minutes before we're going to start to wrap up. So before we get to our final takeaways and words of wisdom from our guests, I want to ask both of you, what's your plan for voting? So I'm in Pennsylvania, so I requested a mail-in ballot earlier this month. I dropped it at my Dropbox last week, and my vote was officially recorded on Thursday. So I was very happy to see that notice come through. So what are your plans for voting this week, or have you voted already?
Already voted.
Yeah,
Great.
my wife and I already voted as well. But if I can take just a moment, both my kids are in college and tried to go through the absentee ballot process here in Texas. Horribly frustrating. It's a ridiculous mess. And so they're actually both flying home tomorrow so that they can vote on Tuesday. Now, don't feel too bad for us. You know, their mom and I are totally thrilled to have both of them home for a week. So, and because of COVID, they're going to be able to do their classes virtually. So neither one of them are missing any classes. But it's really important to us, and it's important to our kids that they vote and participate. So they're literally, one's flying home from Portland and one's flying home from Boulder, and voting is super important. So if you take nothing else away from this call, if you haven't voted, please vote. It is participatory democracy. It only works if we all vote. Get out there. It's an abomination that in the United States, our voting percentages are so low. Take your friends to vote. Take your mom to vote. Anybody that you know that's not voted, see if you can round them up and take them into the ballot box. Please, I hope they're registered to vote. If they're not, it's too late to do that. But if they're registered to vote, and if you are registered to vote and you haven't voted, please, please, please get up, get out there on Tuesday and vote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and talking about our rates of participation, just want to shout out to Harris County, Texas, who I saw this morning. Their 2016 early vote numbers are already greater than the 100% of the people who voted in 2016 total in the election. So almost 1.5 million people have voted in Harris County. So I think Philadelphia has a little bit of catching up to do with our colleagues in Texas. So before we end today, I just want to give each of you an opportunity to share any final words of wisdom you have for our viewers related to the discussion that we've had this morning. So Michelle, I'll start with you. Final thoughts?
Yeah, I would say be inclusive. You know, whatever you're working on, make sure that you include the people that it's impacting. A lot of times people come out and make decisions, legislators, school board members, without ever consulting with the people that are really being impacted by what it is they're doing. So find ways to be inclusive in whatever you're working on. And if you're trying to get engaged, phone a friend. You need at least one friend with you, because two people's voices are heard a lot more than one, and then that helps you build your confidence. So that would be my key point.
Great. What about you, Tim?
Yeah, those are great, Michelle. I would just say never, 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 never give up. It doesn't matter. You're going to get frustrated. There will be in times where you might feel like you've been knocked down and you want to throw in the towel and go on and do something else. Don't give up. Stay in the game. You know, I mean, Abraham Lincoln is a perfect example of somebody who lost over and over and over until he won. And he never gave up. There's so many stories like that. And the only way participatory democracy works, the only way our country works, the only way we make our communities better is if people care. And if people who care never give up. So vote, don't give up, stay in the game.
Great. And Tim, I just want to add something too that stuck with me that you shared prior to the broadcast, which is that I think you said the worst advocacy is the advocacy that doesn't happen. It's about getting it done, right? Don't worry about the details. Don't worry about ensuring that you are 100% correct or have all the knowledge and everything. It's about getting started, having the conversation, getting involved.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that old kind of adage, you're never going to score if you don't take the shot. And if the shot misses by a bunch, well, heck, at least you took the shot and you learned how not to shoot the next time, but keep shooting. And so absolutely, Susan, I can't say that enough. You know, I can tell you as a health advocate in Texas, I don't win a lot all the time. Michelle and I get frustrated sometimes. We're in a pretty conservative state that oftentimes doesn't embrace some of the messages that Michelle and I work on all the time. And we get sidetracked by, like we mentioned earlier, sex education. People get wrapped around the axle about that. And oftentimes we have to stay in it. But yeah, the worst message is the one that you don't deliver. And if you get in and you care, and I mean, I've seen some of the most effective advocates that don't know the first thing about appropriate, you know, how to handle themselves appropriately, but they care and they show up and they're in the game.
That's great. So one final reminder to our viewers, get out there and vote. So whether you're tuning in from Pennsylvania, Texas, or anywhere in between, we encourage you to go to vote.org for state-by-state guides with information on deadlines, dates, and rules that will help you figure out what you need to do to make your voice heard at the ballot box this week. And we hope that you do. Get out there and vote. So it's been a great start to our Saturday morning with yet another great panel of guest speakers. Thank you so much, Tim and Michelle, both for joining us and for sharing your knowledge and for really demystifying and breaking down the policymaking and legislative advocacy process. So viewers, mark your calendars. We'll be broadcasting every Saturday, 10 a.m. Central Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and our next episode will air on Saturday, November 7th. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for being part of the MyDiabetesHQ community, and we'll see you next time, and happy Halloween.
Bye.
Happy Halloween, everybody.